Hi, I'm Kenny Grip, MySQL Product Manager at Oracle. And in this session, we'll be covering MySQL Shell for VS Code, kind of an overview of what it is, the features it has, and kind of the new things that we've released in the last couple of releases. So when we look at the developer survey from Stack Overflow from 2022, you can see that Visual Studio Code is the most popular development environment tool of them all, with 74% of all the respondents saying that they use VS Code. So VS Code is by far the most popular one. And for that, we've kind of made MySQL Shell extension into VS Code, as you can see here on the slide. So it has several features where you can connect to a local database, a remote database, or even OCI. You can connect to a MySQL database system, use MySQL HeatWave. Both OLAP and OLTP features are supported. And it makes it kind of integrated on connecting to the database system. Even do some management in OCI is possible from within the MySQL Shell extension. There's a notebook interface, and there you can kind of write your queries, update them, and use it in a very nice kind of easy to use interface. So what I'll show here in the next slides is just all the features, how to get going, all the little things that it supports, and I'll do that using some demos. And if we start with the installation is very easy. You just go to the marketplace in VS Code, you search for MySQL Shell, and you'll see the MySQL Shell for VS Code, and you just install it. Just click install, and it will be installed within a couple of seconds. So here we'll show how this works. So you go to extensions, then you type in MySQL Shell. So you hit enter, and then a lot of like shell or MySQL words will pop up, but the one you want is the MySQL Shell for VS Code. Just install it. And yeah, after it's installed, you get this pop-up. So what you need to do now is go through some installation wizard. And what needs to be done is the installation of a certificate. So we need to ask for your password to be able to add the certificate. And that is true in all platforms, so Windows, Linux, or even OS X. After that's done, the extension will appear, and yeah, you have MySQL Shell for VS Code extension installed. So this is the installation, so very simple, just a couple of clicks. The next thing that we're going to demo is adding database connections. So on the left top, you have the database editor connections view, where you can see all the connections and the tables and so on. And then you can create remote local connections as you wish. There's features such as like using SSH tunnels, or even using the OCI Bastion service, which we'll cover later today. So if we go to the demo, you click on the button there in the middle, which goes you to kind of the overview of your database connections. So there's no connection now, so we add one connection here. So we enter one, let's say localhost in this case. We can enter a username, password, store password if we want to do that, and hit OK. And then we don't want to connect using SSH or anything because it's a local host. And here we have it. The database is added. And on the view on the left top, you see that the connection is added. So you just click on it, and then you are connected to the DB notebook, where you can kind of start writing your queries. And basically, it's the MySQL Shell terminal or MySQL client, but it is way more interactive and easier to use with the notebook interface. So to go a little bit deeper into what the notebook interface is, so you can write your queries, you can execute them, you can even edit them and then execute them again within Notebook. There's also features where you can have TypeScript support and write some TypeScript extensions to use that data to make some graphs with it or whatever you want to do. So we'll show you that here. So we connected to our database local host, and we go to the Sakila schema, the actors tables, and let's right click and then show data, which will show you the select star from Sakila actor. So you can see it shows the top results You can do it for another table as well. And yeah, you can see the results from both queries still remain there in the interface. You can even edit a previous query and add a where clause to it, for example, where actor ID is bigger than 35, for example. You can rerun the query and it will update that. So you don't lose the query that you ran before. You don't have to copy paste it all the time. So this is all quite easy to use. Now you can switch to TypeScript. So we have SQL mode and then also TypeScript. And as an example, let's run a query where we select everything from Sakila schema dot actor, and we want to store this result. And let's see here. It's just going to print it. So if you run this, it's connected to the database, localhost, and here you have it. You have a kind of JSON object which shows you the same data in JSON. So yeah, you can write some code there. In this case, we're using the PyGraph extension in TypeScript to be able to render some graph. And we run the query where we get kind of the label and the amount of movies per label that exists like per language here. So you can see this will generate a graph. You can also kind of change it, whatever PyGraph supports. So maybe we change the layout to be a donut and execute it again. And then here you have it. You have a donut. So that's TypeScript support notebook. The next thing is let's look a little bit into what OCI integration we have and how to connect to a MySQL HeatWave DB system. You can connect directly from your VS Code through the OCI Bastion service into the database. So normally you would have to have a compute machine running somewhere to be able to connect using to the private IP. Here, this is all done integrated with the Bastion service. And there's a nice interface showing kind of the OCI infrastructure, all the compartments you have in your tenancy, or even multiple tenancies, multiple database systems. It's even showing kind of bastions, load balancers, computes. It's showing all that within the kind of the tab on the left there, the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So how do we install this? There's a couple of steps we have to take to be able to configure it, because we need to configure our OCI profile. If you already have used kind of OCI CLI commands or anything like that, this is already done and you wouldn't have to do this. But let's assume we start from scratch. So we log into cloud.oracle.com, we go to our user, go to the API key, and we will add a API key. So let's generate one. We download the private key, and now we need to store this in the .oci folder in our home directory, because that's where the OCI kind of command line tools or the libraries look for the configuration of the OCI tools. So we need to name this OCI API key. Then we also need to download the public key, which we will name OCI API key underscore public, or sorry, private. Okay, then we add this. And what we will see now is the configuration that is proposed by Oracle Cloud to use with all the tenancy information, the compartments and whatnot. So you click on that edit button in the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and you just copy and paste it in there. So you have the user ID, OCID, the fingerprint, the tenancy, and the region that you're using for where you added that private key. So you can add multiple configurations in the OCI config. This is just OCI SDK, so you might have one already, so you can name it, you can add multiples, and they will all appear then in the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure tab. So when we save this file, we change it to the right API key, we hit refresh, you can see we have the MySQL tooling tenancy, and then there's a whole set of compartments. So let's say we want to use the development compartment. Under there's another compartment, the MDS development. Let's set this one as the current compartment. So this one will be kind of the default, the one showing as top level here. So we can open that and we see like some DB systems, some compute, some bastions. So now we want to create a connection. So you right click on the database system you want to connect to, and you can see everything is pre-filled in. You just need to enter the username and the password that you want to use. And on the bottom, you can see it says connect to OCI DB server using MDS settings. So it will use the OCI Bastion service. If you do not have a Bastion configured yet, what will happen is a new Bastion will be provisioned, if permissions are there, of course, by that user, to be able to kind of connect to the database system. So we'll connect to that in a minute. But first, let's kind of do a little use case. Let's say we want to lift and shift some data from an on-premise system or from your local machine into kind of a MySQL HeatWave in OCI. So some of the features in here is the MySQL shell dump and load, and you can do this all within the VS Code extension. So let's show that and connect to that database in MDS as well. So if we click on it, you can see it's showing that it's reusing the existing Bastion session. There was one already. It's creating a tunnel here, and now you're connected. Just like we were connected previously to a local host system, you're now connected through an SSH tunnel in the Bastion service. You can also show all the details here about administration, the schema. Everything is available. It's an empty DB system in this case. So let's say we want to take our Sakila schema and dump this to the MySQL database service. We want to dump and load it in there, lift and shift it. So let's store this data. This is a small data set, test data set that we have. We store this dump in the Sakila directory. So we dumped it first, and now we want to load it. So we right-click on MDS DB system, say load, we choose the document, and then select dump. And what will happen is a new shell task will appear where it was loading the data now. Through the Bastion, it's creating these SSH tunnels, if not exist yet, and it's starting to load the data. Of course, there's more features within MySQL shell itself. If you run it locally, it's going to be much faster. There's object storage integration. But the VS Code extension is more to get some development data from your machine straight into kind of a DB system to try. So you can see now when we have the Sakila schema, we can select data. Everything's there now on our DB system. So we've used the shell extension, MySQL shell VS Code extension, to kind of connect locally, connect to a MySQL HeatWave. There's also some specific features that we have for MySQL HeatWave for OLAP, where you can execute queries using the automatic method, where it will either offload to the OLAP analytics part, or it still uses InnoDB local execution to execute your queries. But you can now configure, say, okay, I want to execute this specific query for HeatWave and OLTP or OLAP specifically. So that's a button that you can use. You can also kind of, you can connect, of course, we've shown that. You can also do some management where you can rescale the cluster, add more nodes to the HeatWave OLAP cluster, and so on. So let's show how specifically this works. So we have a HeatWave DB system here and a cluster that is one node. Let's say we want to rescale the cluster. So this is a feature of MySQL HeatWave for OLAP, where you can say, okay, instead of one node, I now want to have more nodes. So you can say, okay, I want 2 nodes. So let's save that. What it will happen is that the necessary API requests will be sent to OCI to rescale the cluster. Shell will follow that as a task. So this takes a while, depending on how long it takes in OCI to execute this. But what we'll end up with is 2 nodes instead of 1 node to offload our queries and have a performance benefit. So the task is done, and now we have 2 nodes. So we can now connect to this database. So using the Bastion service again, all automatic, you don't have to do anything. And we have some tables, some HeatWave schema, which has some test data for this demo. So there's some data in the HeatWave.test table. So here we're doing a count from HeatWave test. It has about 2 million rows. Let's say we want to run a query here, and we execute this standard way. It takes about 1.1 second to execute. Let's say we want to offload this to HeatWave. We want to execute this with HeatWave specifically. Then you click the HeatWave button. In this case, we get an error. And the error is that there's some syntax that is not supported yet. With regular MySQL connection, in order to get this error, you need to optimizer trace, which is kind of like a lot of queries you need to run. Here we automated this and we show the error immediately what it was. So we fixed the query, we changed it a bit, and now we execute the query, and the query is a lot faster, like 10 times faster. For this is a very small query, of course, but this is just purposes for the demonstration. So it's a lot faster to offload this query to MySQL HeatWave for analytics. Another feature which may come useful is to execute queries which are within code. In this example that we'll show is Python. So we want to execute some snippets there. We can use the notebook interface again to kind of change the query, update it, and then even when we updated the query, as we kind of develop in the notebook interface, we can update the SQL in the original source as well. So let's have a look how this looks. So we have a little project here in Python. Let's say we go to dbobjects.py, and then we have an SQL query here. So let's say we want to execute this query or kind of run it, execute. You need to choose a connection that you have within the extension. And then what happens is a new DB notebook appears, and then you can execute this query. So in this case, it was executed, and we have 4 records returned. Now let's say we want to update it because it's not the query we want. We can change it to say, okay, it needs to be a procedure or a function as well that we want to select from this table, and we have a bit better result. So what we can do now is we can put this data back into the Python by just right-clicking and then saying updating SQL in original source file, and then it updates the code itself. So that's kind of the integration to make it easy to kind of figure out the query, optimize the query, and then copy it back. So this helps a lot in your workflow in developing when connecting and using MySQL. And then the last section is one of the latest additions to the VS Code extension, is to have some basic administration and some basic metrics to kind of have an overview on what's going on the database. So let's connect to localhost. We have the MySQL administration tab here. So we can click on server status, and you can see some basic configuration. In this case, it's a MySQL community server 8030. You can see if what the logging is enabled, what features are enabled, where the data is located, and so on. So it's a nice overview of this. Another thing is to see the client connections, show process list basically, or select from process list, where you can see there are kind of 3 connections right now. You can see what they are doing, but you also can look at some details, and then you can see what is it actually doing. So we have even information about metadata logs, which comes from performance schema tables. There's even the attributes that we can get. All this information is available through performance schema, but in this case, we make it easy to kind of show you. Just click and drill down a little bit more in what you want to see about this query that is running. So let's say we go to remote server now, and we will look at some performance dashboard. In this case, we're showing a database that is having a little bit of some workload for demonstration. And you can see we have some network status, MySQL status, and InnoDB status graphs and metrics that we show. So what is happening is that MySQL shell extension fetches this data periodically. So it doesn't have any historical information available, but it does show you how things are going right now What's my InnoDB buffer pool? Is it used? How much writes are happening? What's the network traffic? How many queries are executed? So some graphs are available to show and to kind of have a glimpse on what's the database doing. Is it performing well, and so on. Yeah, we have some other things here: table cache, the threads, how many transactions, and so on. And that's it. So what I've covered here today is kind of all the features that the MySQL shell for VS Code extension supports. So it's available right now. It's freely available. You just go to the VS Code marketplace and search for MySQL shell, and you'll find the extension, and you can download it and get it up and running in a couple of minutes. So it's quite easy to do. So that's it for my presentation today. Thank you for attending. Thanks.